Putin is groveling before Trump again. This time, the method is a new fake claim about the capture of Kostiantynivka. How the Russian dictator unsuccessfully tries to show strength preparing for a meeting with Trump in December. But won't Putin be afraid to go there? Also, a complete split within the Russian leadership, fear of declaring mobilization, and the consequences of Ukrainian long-range attacks. We'll talk about this right now. Welcome everyone to our channel, and today we have Taras Zagorodny with us, a political strategist and managing partner of the Anti-Crisis Group. Taras, hello.
Yes, hello.
Today I'd like to discuss with you the topic of Putin's recent statements, which could be quite a show for Trump and his team. Let's start with the fact that the Kremlin intentionally published a video of Putin's meeting about the alleged capture of Kostiantynivka just before the workday ended in Washington. And tell me, how does the Kremlin expect to use this fake, since this information has already been debunked to pressure Trump's team before their visit to Moscow?
Well, I don't think it's any kind of pressure. Putin wants to show some results in order to resume some talks with Trump, either on Ukraine or on Papua New Guinea, or on the protection of fur seals, for example, in the Atlantic Ocean. Because when Americans don't talk to Putin, it's a sign primarily for China that he's basically a nobody now, and a sign for the internal elites that Putin is no longer someone you shake hands with, even at that level. And accordingly, those attempts to show that there's some effectiveness, it's a kind of symmetrical way to seize the initiative from Ukraine. Because after all, Americans are absolutely pragmatic and quite cynical people. They see the results, they see that Russia is burning, they see that the Russian government is shaking, they see the blockade of Crimea, they see the logistics blockade in the temporarily occupied territories. And so the Americans get a sound thought that always comes when seeing this, to place, to make a bet on the winner, because nobody wants to deal with the defeated, especially since that would suit Trump. The majority of voters, both Republicans and Democrats, support Ukraine, and, well, they definitely don't like Putin. And accordingly, he's trying there, flailing around, putting on some military uniform again, talking about some fake, his fantastic successes. Well, considering how he's already said about 5 times that Kupiansk was taken, yeah, they even awarded some general as a hero of Russia for it. So it's clear that, well, you can't fool the Americans here. They see everything in real time, they know everything perfectly well. Reports, I think, are constantly coming to Trump, and it's clear that he's looking at all this, at this ridiculous circus, and thinking, like, why? Why should I support you? Moreover, the Russians are in a very bad situation because the sanctions on Iran were lifted. This means extra oil appeared on the market, prices dropped, and for American producers, basically a comfortable price is around $85. If the price of Brent now drops to 73, it means that to maintain the profitability of American companies, primarily, someone has to disappear from the market. Well, the ideal candidate is Russia. And we basically see that Ukraine, our interests here coincide 150% with the Americans. And Ukraine, you see, just literally on this night, there was a strike on the port in St. Petersburg. It was a joint operation involving the SBU, the GUR, and Magyar. As usual, in his colorful, expressive language, Magyar explained quite clearly where exactly Moscow should go with its oil export terminals.
Tell me, journalists have noticed more than once that Putin is not for the first time demonstrating fake activity specifically, yes, in some command posts right before calls to Trump or visits by his team. And tell me, will the Kremlin's strategy at the front change, or can it change overall now that they're starting to somewhat tie the military agenda completely to the American political calendar?
Well, theoretically they could, but I think they're already working at the limit of their capabilities. Moreover, Ukraine is once again seizing the initiative, specifically in destroying logistics in the temporarily occupied territory, including Crimea. And so will there be an attempt? Well, possibly. Will it succeed? That's also still a big question, because if they could change something, they would have changed it long ago, of course. Well, like that same mobilization that's often talked about and used to scare people. If everything were so simple in Russia with mobilization, I assure you Putin would have carried it out long ago. But they understand that this could have not very good consequences, especially against the backdrop of people's irritation and standing in lines for gas, where they're already quite skillfully punching each other's faces. Ukraine is actively working on destabilizing fuel supplies, primarily to Moscow. And destabilization in Moscow, it really scares the authorities because it could end the way it usually ends. And even more so because other events are happening in Russia right now. Arrests of Putin's inner circle are underway. And this just goes to show that Putin feels his power is slipping away, a rebellion is starting, and he's trying to stabilize the situation this way. Well, for example, that guy Trauber was arrested, a big shot who's known Putin since the days of the St. Petersburg mayor's office. But the arrest of another person was more interesting. Malakov, I think, was his name or something like that. And he's considered to be the manager of Rotenberg's assets. And Rotenberg isn't just not just like a business partner of Putin's, he's a childhood friend. They even went to the same judo club together, right? And so, what this really shows is that President Vladimir Putin is even making an effort to keep his closest childhood friends, those he has known for many years, in line. He's warning them, making it clear that they should not even think about starting any sort of rebellion, nor should they do anything that could possibly threaten or undermine Putin's power. And accordingly, this is a very interesting process that's unfolding. It shows that the system is shifting into a mode where it's not very manageable. Moving on. Questions are starting to arise about whether they control people on the ground, like governors, who will now be writing excuses about what's happening, because now governors and even local security elites are essentially left alone with their problems. Well, when there's no fuel, the regional economies collapse. And who do people ask questions of first? Well, not Putin, right? They go to punch the local bosses in the face first. And so I think their mood isn't very good about this, and it's only going to get worse. I mean, look, it's only the beginning of July now, right? Let's see how they'll even manage to hold elections in the fall, how they'll be able to harvest the crops, because there are already reports that they're falling behind on the harvest, and harvesting has its limits. They can't stay in the fields for long. This is a question of food again. How will you provide people with food and many other things? So, judging by how frantically they're trying to find either kerosene for the planes or trying to import fuel from Kazakhstan, India, and other countries, the situation is, well, heating up in Russia. And they're trying, Putin first and foremost, to consolidate power into a single fist. But I think that it won't really work out for them.
And so Kostiantynivka is called by analysts a target for the Kremlin to declare full control over the Donbas. And tell me, in your opinion, what concessions from Trump can Putin count on if the armed forces of Ukraine continue to successfully hold these positions and not allow the Russian army to advance further and enter key cities in the Donbas?
Well, listen, Trump can promise them anything he wants, but Ukraine will say no. It's like you're negotiating, you made a deal, so you carry it out, as they say in this case. Well, I think the talk about Ukraine having to leave Donbas has long since been dismissed as nonsense. In general, when you show on maps that you control Crimea and control the logistics of Donbas all the way to the 1991 borders, well, to say that someone will tell Ukraine, go ahead and do something there would be ridiculous. I think the Americans don't want to look ridiculous.
And so Putin's main goal right now is a personal meeting with Donald Trump at the G20 summit, right, in Miami this December. And tell me, what specific results on the front and in the economy as a whole must Putin achieve by winter for Trump to even agree to talk to him as an equal?
You're talking about winter. It's not even clear how they'll survive this autumn, and you're already looking so far ahead to winter. I think it's still uncertain how August will go for them, judging by the pace Ukraine has set. Well, look, I think it's not a given that he'll go. He's just afraid to leave Moscow, I think, because you can go to Miami, but it might happen that you're no longer the president when you try to return to Russia, right? Well, okay, let's imagine there's a conversation, purely theoretically. So, what will the conversation be about? Again, about the spirit of anchorage? Again, about how you promised us something? Right. Well, Trump will say in his style, a man of his word, I promised and I took it back. Right. Especially since the well, look, Trump's negotiating tactic is based on a specific analysis of the situation and the balance of power as it stands at the moment, not what it was a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, or even 6 months ago. If he sees results like a report coming in, the Ukrainian missile program is progressing so much that you can't tell the Ukrainians anything anymore, right? They don't control the missiles and so on. So the Americans will proceed from what is it, the realities, as Russians like to say, the realities on the ground, just as the Americans will proceed from the realities on the ground. So these repetitions about how they owe them something will be so irrelevant to the Americans that Trump will, of course, say it was a great meeting. And all his meetings are great, but there won't be a conversation about anything. Because, first of all, the Americans don't have such leverage over Ukraine, and you can promise anything, but nothing will come of it. And Putin will say the same thing, that Ukraine must withdraw from 4 regions of Ukraine for a ceasefire, and again follow these demands, the list of demands they drew up for themselves and called the Istanbul agreements.
So it turns out that Putin, in his speech, even expressed clear irritation with the drone raids and directly called it an escalation at the front, right? With strikes on important facilities. So, for now, I don't think anyone will even follow his wishes in general. And tell me, what is the Kremlin's overall logic in all of this? Because in fact, he demands an end to strikes on his own. Of course, oil refining facilities, yes, plants and so on, but at the same time he continues to attack Ukraine and attacks not even such important objects. Sometimes it's a toilet paper factory, sometimes it's a warehouse, for example, yes, some kind, or a service center. So it's not even that it's force against force, but I'd just like to understand a bit in general if there's any logic at all to these strikes.
Well, there is logic. They won't stop shooting as long as they're at war. The logic is that they think by striking civilian infrastructure, they will cause public discontent. And the population, of course, will run to the center of Kiev to overthrow the government and demand concessions that Putin is talking about. But that won't happen, and that's why they will continue to shoot.
Well, in any case, we will continue to monitor the events. Thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you.
Until next time.
Goodbye.